December 21st, 2002, 10:02 p.m., Azúcar. Before he disappeared, a byproduct of my association with Ron was an introduction to Gao Shaosong, a filmmaker who'd used Ron as an extra in one of his films. In Shenyang, through a local friend of Monroe, the Jack Black type who'd first invited me to Sophie's, I met a group of underground filmmakers who'd wanted to screen a documentary and some footage I'd shot in New York. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, however, they took out whatever anger they had on whatever Americans were in their circle and destroyed my tapes, which I couldn't retrieve after the screening. When I told Orville, he apparently had someone beat them up pretty badly, but it never got me the tapes back. But Ron had taken note of my plight and dug up Gao Shaosong's number. We arranged to meet on South Sunnyton Bar Street, a place that was by all manner of inception for so much that was to follow. I shook his hand and sat down in the dark, worn wooden booth, surrounded by walls of dark wooden planks, with a glass candle jar elegantly lighting up our table. Song was sort of black rock and roll leather jacket burly with long black hair, a living trope of the cultured Chinese artist. We spoke a few pleasantries, touching on New York, Sogo Ashii, cyberpunk, and the music scene, with a few questions on the side for a few minutes, before he introduced me to a small-framed, attractive face from Xinjiang, the Muslim-dominated New Frontier in the West. This was how I met Bao Luo, China's first female punk rocker. Gao Shaosong laid it out casually beforehand that she was looking for a boyfriend, but that didn't warp the conversation that followed too much. She was a fan of the 4AD sound and had worked it into some of her new material. Warner Music had dubbed her the Spirit of China. Seeing as we were pretty comfortable with each other, neither of us wanted it all to end just yet, and she invited me to meet another filmmaker, He Jianjun. She was still working on the soundtrack for his new film, which I was sure my friend, the China rep for the MPAA, would be a fan of. It was called Pirate Movie. It had a terrific scene in which a young out-of-work couple act out the Ezekiel 25:17 scene in Pulp Fiction while watching it on a pirated DVD, and then try to figure out what they're going to do for money as they scrape out the last of their food. After deciding not to attack any foreigner because the consequences are too dangerous, they end up taking a back alley to raid the take of a pirated DVD racket, walking in on an attempted rape in progress. The actress playing the victim was Bao Luo's younger sister. The couple who walked in on them pull the gun and kill one of the would-be rapists. When I did finally get to relay the news of the new film to Eileen, she didn't seem very jazzed and told me that He Jianjun was currently blacklisted by China's government. That goddamn censorship again, but that reaction to his work was something I was proud to share, and just added to the camaraderie and respect of a fellow artist. and the 90-minute Betacam digital PAL tape still made a nice splash at the festival in Rotterdam. And so Bao scooped me up out of that otherwise aimless night, first to meet He Jianjun and some of his crew, who were partying in a hotel a 20-minute taxi ride away. We sat down to share a meal, passing and picking from a variety of dishes, and everyone took in a pretty generous amount of booze. And before too long, we were packing back into another taxi, as many as could fit, heading over to Bao's new apartment with Su Fang, her musical partner. At each new chapter of the night, Bao would make a suggestion to see if I was game, and at every stage I accepted the challenge and turned the page. The unplanned nature of things was again pulling me forward. The taxi sped along the fourth ring highway, and the driver probably hoping to unload this festive ruckus as soon as possible.
We are all aliens.
Bao laughed from the back seat. Wangjing was a stretch from the center of town. The residential towers that looked randomly dropped along the landscape just added to the pleasantness of getting happily lost. The taxi wheeled around one roundabout to the next, and we had arrived. 4:11 a.m. By now, most everyone had left, and had apparently approved of Bao and I staying there that night together. The apartment was on the 20th floor, and Bao occupied the apartment of the year, 2002. But the night wasn't done with either of us. We'd migrated to our bed, more out of habit than anything else, but being still raw from the romantic trauma back in New York, I'd been cornered back into another what now moment, a dead end. But that was all happening in real time, just as a surprise call from a previous male friend spurred Bao into a flurry of apologies, back into a default fun mode one might expect from rock stars. And this required me to take a leave of absence. The decision was made for me. My awkwardness in this midst of China chaos mixed better with my own condition than any plans I could make to settle down into a relationship, let alone being a distraction for this kind of musical royalty. Instead, I chose to play it as a favor I could cash in later, if it ever came to that kind of transactional bottom level kind of thing. There were zero hard feelings, as according to her plan to keep me a secret from him, the door opened, and as soon as he'd collapsed into her bed, I made a stealth stomach crawl across the hardwood floor, out of the room and out of the apartment. In the soft, quiet blue of the early morning, on my way to a nearby taxi stand outside of a convenience store, I passed a couple of black SUVs parked outside Bao's building. I glanced back when all the doors opened at once, and a few guys in suits walked another guy who looked Korean, and a guy who reminded me of the security officer I'd met in Shenyang, out of the lobby and into the SUVs. The SUVs then took off and drove away. All the time I'd been up there in Wangjing, I hadn't noticed the proportionally larger segment of North Koreans, who it later seemed everyone knew made up most of this community. In the weeks that followed, I guess Bao felt she owed me a favor after all. Probably as a move to shed any sort of lingering hope for romance, she invited the accomplished writer Hong Ying to a performance art event up at 798, and I ended up in bed with yet another, where the goals were more clear from the get-go, with zero barriers, until she'd confessed the next morning that she was in fact married. An easy out for me, but the acquaintances through Bao didn't stop there. By now, I had already gladly accepted a request from He Jianjun to help edit a music video for one of Bao's songs, and as we were cutting our way through to a rough edit, Bao picked up her cell phone and called He Yong, her male punk pioneer counterpart, leading to a meeting at Hohai to talk about maybe shooting a music video if he ever wanted to lay down any new songs. He Yong was still in some kind of phase though, which didn't have the spark that drove him before. I kept his number in my phone though, along with Do Wei's number as well, but never called because Do Wei was still in some kind of trouble with his girlfriend, Wang Fei. But in light of my overbearing background as a photographer, Paolo scheduled us a lunch with an editor friend at Cosmopolitan. That meeting got me shooting a succession of profiles on Beijing notables, including Alice Chu, vice president of Meida Coffee Company, otherwise known as Starbucks.
I like music by dead people,
She said, as we got to know each other while I was loading up the first roll of 220 film. Alice's apartment looked like another indicator of how easy it seemed to take advantage of the lax laws governing construction. The reason the Beijing landscape was now twisting and changing colors and textures, struggling to define itself in the face of so much opening up as the Olympics approached. The jewel-inlaid bathtub was in the center of the mostly empty bathroom. Not many distractions when you prefer music by dead people. Alice and I exchanged numbers. About a day later, she called to set me up with a friend of hers who needed someone just like me to help launch his magazine, the official Starbucks magazine, that would be in all 35 stores in Beijing and Tianjin. I took the mission, ate it up completely, and by now had begun to build up a formidable list of contacts, perfect collaborators for a series of articles and photographs I would come to crank out as the magazine's editor-in-chief. By now, in 2002, the bar and music scene was in an epical expansion, and so was my contacts list. Among them was Paul Fry, the international manager for Cui Jian, the godfather of Chinese rock and roll, whose songs were anthems among the students in Tiananmen Square in 1989, and who would later share a stage with the Rolling Stones in Shanghai. Paul finally offered to introduce us, seeing the PR opportunity through Starbucks and maybe more. When Cui Jian and I finally did connect, the Starbucks goals faded as soon as I mentioned my relationship with Baoloa, and we also now had each other's cell numbers. It was a milestone to be friends with and occasional photographer for the first artist to ever grace the Chinese edition of Rolling Stone magazine. The end of the line at Cosmopolitan, though, was another icon in the pantheon of Chinese musical gods, maybe the biggest of all, the Michael Jackson of China himself, Zhou Jielun, also known as Jay Chou. The moment I'd won the bid on the Olay shoot for Edelman, I approached one of my earlier subjects I'd shot for Cosmopolitan, Li Zhenhua, an eccentric artist looking to bring an incarnation of London's White Cube Gallery to Beijing. Sure, he had a friend who had a Hasselblad 501c3 with a Polaroid back, but it was a challenge to rent it from him. The guy saw me as competition who he didn't want to help out. I understood, but I'm just some foreign guy edging in on local space. But I offered a little extra for the rental, plus the promise of some art director work, just so I could get past that first gig. Then, with the cash that I made from that first large shoot for the Olay campaign, I cut out to a place called Wukesong, the mother of all camera markets, and went to town, finding everything I thought was a good career investment. Not just a 501c3 and Polaroid back, but all the strobes, softbox, tripod, and stands. I carried it all, Hasselblad film, 2 film backs, and a Polaroid back, into a sturdy black Manfrotto camera bag, into the lobby of the Asia Hotel, which is just outside the Second Ring Road. The editor waved at me, past the 3 groupie girls who had somehow gotten tipped off about the shoot and were stalking Jay in the lobby. She and an assistant walked me directly to the elevator, down a hallway, and into the room where I met the guy face to face. He was pretty soft-spoken for a pop star, making fun of me every time I made a shot I liked, saying, "Cool." I stood on the coffee table and shot him lying on his back on a sofa, raising his finger to his lips, as if to quiet the buzz that had plagued him constantly. It was everyone's favorite shot, including mine. There were 2 bodyguards that day as well, pretty hefty guys that enjoyed watching me work. Tim, a Nigerian, was less talkative than Seb, his Aussie counterpart, who asked me if I wanted to come and meet his nightlife business partner, who owned a few clubs in town. This was how I met Henry Lee, or King Henry as he came to be known.
This is how Chinese people drink whiskey and soda. We're not James Bond, we stir. James Bond only shaking.
If he had a motto, it was just as he once told me, looking straight at me, dead serious in spite of the chemicals. If there was no party, we'd be having World War III already, long time ago. The particular constellations of people who comprised Beijing's more cultured, glittery star systems seemed to revolve around Madame Song, who ran Pierre Cardin in Beijing and facilitated social events at Maxim's, also owned by Pierre Cardin. Maxim's was the cultural epicenter where Cui Jian, who himself had married into Madame Song's family, had spent time playing parties while his college buddy Zhang Yodai would play cassettes like the Rolling Stones, U2, or the Police between sets. Yodai was given the nickname DJ, even though he didn't know what it meant at the time. Cui Jian's legendary status was complemented by his appearance with the Rolling Stones in Shanghai many years later, and Yodai himself eventually became the first person to play rock and roll on the radio in China. Henry Lee had already started one club, Vogue, that got closed down by the authorities, allegedly for a persistent presence of narcotics. He had also set up Public Space, more of an ultra-modern daytime cafe engagement that stayed open late as a bar. Rose Bar and Justine's had already plowed the road from the late 90s, playing infamously shit music, but a kind that people loved to dance to. And then there was Maggie's. But three of Henry's biggest fans, a trio of girls who'd gotten used to the world he was bringing to Beijing, wanted to make a contribution of their own. This was how the world of Susie Wong became a bar. The first few months of 2003 had me busy shooting for Cosmopolitan, then Elle, then The Economist, and a German lifestyle digest called Wirtschaftswoche. The rest of the world wanted a peek inside the country, and I was one of their best boots on the ground. I took on Getty Images as well, becoming one of their first 4 photographers in China. A stocky, perpetually sauced British economic consultant named Jason was a regular at Aperitivo, a cafe and bar run by a socially aggressive Italian named Stefano. Stefano also owned Mediterraneo, a few blocks away on the main embassy street, where Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke ate dinner together regularly during Kill Bill principal photography. Jason said Helena and I looked good together as we walked into Aperitivo together one night, but we were already deep into relationships with our work. Helena Mann had arrived in country a couple of years before I did, and had been cultivating contacts in some of the same corridors, and by the time we met up for dinner at Schiller's, a German restaurant in the Embassy District, at the Liangma River across from Capitol Mansion, she'd already done mostly black and white photo essays on the punk scene, AIDS, and was also working on a series on North Korean refugees. We hadn't spoken much, we were just trying to keep our own heads above the chaos. And tonight, I had accepted Seb's invitation to meet Henry at his new club called The Club, another one of his additions to Beijing's nightlife legacy, just around the corner from Aperitivo. Every place I go, there's a soundtrack. I make a playlist of tracks that speak to the moment, whenever that might be, and one of the most influential was Morcheeba's On the Roads Again, from the Traffic soundtrack, which I played frequently in my earphones ever since that long flight from New York. Traffic was already powerful in the theater back in the States. As far as propaganda involving narcotics, it didn't seem to preach too hard in one direction or another, and I appreciated that kind of honesty coming from Hollywood. The issue of addiction was really at its heart, addressing it more of a symptom of being human, an innately human biochemical process that had to be managed and maintained. So by the time that I got to the club, I'd already listened to the Traffic soundtrack on repeat dozens of times. I just wasn't prepared to see Morcheeba there, performing in the club as people danced. I walked right up to Paul Godfrey, who was the star DJ that night, so close that he motioned for me to back away a bit with my small video camcorder. The lights flashed along with everyone's pulse, and my own seemed to finally match the beat of Beijing. At the bar, I ordered a vodka cranberry, leaning over next to Katie Senat, the wife of Eric, a Frenchman from Marseille who ended up hiring me as his de facto in-house photographer. I handed Katie my card for OSS.net, which was really all I had going for me at that stage, as a China consultant. Seb had phone tagged me with Guillaume, a short goateed web programming virtuoso from Toulouse. Guillaume and I formed a partnership called G2, and together we tackled not just Eric's online presence, but other large companies, including an American auto parts company called the Simco. Katie was besties with the wife of Jack Perkowski, a Simco's founder and author of Managing the Dragon, How I'm Building $1 Billion Business in China. Eric and I worked together so well that we ended up with close to a dozen shoots together for his salon, which sat directly above the club on the second floor. Eric's clients sat in the highest seats in town among the expat and Chinese elite. At one of Eric's parties, Henry Lee turned and walked towards me with a bottle of champagne. The James Bond parallels trajectory then suddenly came full circle as the penultimate Chinese Bond girl herself, Michelle Yeoh, emerged from behind him. Henry said that I was the best photographer in Beijing, because there was no way he was going to waste Michelle Yeoh's time with second-class associations. Henry kept the encounter pretty short, while Michelle Yeoh was a lot shorter than the rest of her entourage, as they followed after her, a force of her own. By this time, Cal was among my extended friends, as we each were swept up in our respective trajectories. We decided to meet again one afternoon at the Bookworm, which sometimes hosted talks, meets and greets by luminaries like Peter Hessler of The New Yorker and Chris Doyle, celebrated director of photography for In the Mood for Love, one of my favorites. The food was also reputable, a place you could get a steak with rice and a salad, all arranged in a splendid presentation, for not too much out of your wallet. I joined Cal at a table in the reading room, where he was saying goodbye to a young girl he'd met at 798.
"You'll never guess the gig I just landed,"
he said, devilish smile breaking through his normally casual demeanor. He told me that he'd just been recruited to be Zhang Zi's English dialogue coach. Before Cal and I were going to part ways for the afternoon, he dropped an invitation to one of those moments when everything changed.
"There's a big party tonight in Dongzhimen. I think Clementine's going to be there if you want to go."
I thought you said she was off limits.
"Yeah, well, she broke up with Smithy, so maybe she's low-hanging fruit at this point."
Okay, so are we expecting any of her Russian mafia entourage?
"Yeah, maybe, but she's clearly not into connecting with any of that. Otherwise, she'd already have hooked up with one of those guys. She's not stupid,"
Cal said, almost like a warning. Over lunch, Cal told me a little more about what he'd managed to harvest out of the art district up north. It wasn't just a connect that landed him his celebrity gig. There was another girl who'd come into some money who was looking for investors to build a gallery space where the art was going to be used to launder money. It was part of a deal with her boyfriend, a young gangster who'd slept with a gun under his pillow. Later that night, I met up with Cal again, and we arrived at the party. There was a whole other scene of people who were interconnected in their own little way, who seemed to revolve around the gravitational pull that Clementine and Smith seemed to exude. One of them was Dean Prescott, a New Yorker much like myself, whose parents were also documentarians in the city, and might have at least heard of my own father. Dean was a vivacious smoker, sandy blonde hair, white shirt with 3 buttons open, fluent in French on top of his native New York English. Every bit the glam-wielding producer. The guy was built to take charge of the entertainment scene, and was already working on getting money to produce a documentary about what happens at night in China.
"I know everyone wants to do it. The punks are already overdone, Jesus,"
he said.
"But I've been talking to this rich couple from Texas. I don't know, but maybe we're there. Who the fuck knows?
I told Dean that I'd already shot and produced for IBM and was one of the first 4 photographers for Getty Images in China, and had made a film in New York that got awards there and was even at the market at Cannes. I maintained that the issues with Sogo Ishii's co-production manager had stood in the way of what would have been an amazing cyberpunk milestone. The conversation was definitely building its own bit of gravity because Clementine suddenly materialized and wanted to know who I was, if nothing else, maybe a way out of her Russian shadows. Clark Rant III, the son of the U.S. ambassador, made an addition to our conversation circle, listening in and making very few alcohol-inspired comments, not quite enough to break out of his Ivy League white turtleneck. Dean finally sealed my acquaintance with Miss Clementine Kadir, making the neutral introduction with no stakes or strings attached. It was on the credit of us both being from New York and involved in film. It was enough for Clementine's phone number and an offer to share a taxi on the way back home from the party. Dean tagged along in the front seat next to the driver and got out first, leaving me in the back seat with Clementine. If it weren't for experience, I would have been a sucker for the chemistry and the energy that was happening again. So there was nothing else left to do now but tamp it down with some small talk for the rest of the ride. She was at a place a little further south, a standout array of white modern design which the developer had decided to call Soho. We consummated the short time together with the obligatory European cheek-to-cheek, and I watched the taxi lurch forward, getting lost in the collecting mass of red brake lights. I guess Dean had taken some time to run me. I was invited up for a pitch session to the home of Pamela and Chuck, the people who are apparently going to finance us. They rode Harleys around Beijing, as American a couple as they could be, now that they were in their late 50s. Dean and I started casting for a host after Pamela floated the idea for the series. I brought up Ridley Scott's decision to abandon the narration in Blade Runner, and we chose the direct route. We kicked a lot of interview subject ideas around, and then the North Korean angle came up again. Pamela called me into her office and pitched me an idea that I said I'd have to think about. An hour later, sitting at one of the outside street tables at Aperitivo, I ordered a gin and tonic and called Helena from a new tiny Sony Ericsson cell phone. Well, it looks like I'm in. Yeah, we're looking for stories, people to interview.
About China?
Well, nightlife. I mean, whatever happens at night.
Well, I'm just back from the border with North Korea. There's a pink prison there.
A pink prison?
Yeah, I send you a couple of pictures if you want.
All right, so apparently the people hiring us pitched me on this really weird special place where generals, politicians, business leaders, all the rich assholes fly into a private airstrip in North Korea. And there's a casino, hookers, lots of money.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure you should really take that one,
she said, a lighthearted caution emerging from her German accent.
You would have to get really special permission. I don't think they want the rest of the world to know about that.
Well, what about your source on the refugees? Would he or she talk about it in an interview? I mean, who from China is going over there?
Oh, no, impossible. He is already soon leaving, but I don't think he's going to be available soon.
Helena laughed. Not that her contact would even be able to smell activity of that magnitude. But that was how it was among us expats, especially those of us who were in any way involved with some kind of journalism. It was an unspoken rule. We would all support each other, no matter what. Tom, my photojournalism brother, once met up with me at a new laid-back Mediterranean-styled hippie joint called Souk. I'd brought a date, another girl I'd met at one of the newer clubs called Babyface, and introduced her to Tom. The three of us sat drinking, and before long were joined by a slew of other journalists. including an Australian Reuters photographer sporting a well-styled head of blonde hair, all in need of a proper night out. Now that Tom was putting his much better Mandarin to rather swimmingly good use with this girl I'd brought over, the Aussie and I opted for a Latin-themed club, which catered to all the local rich women heavy into salsa dancing, not unlike Gong Li in Miami Vice, apparently also looking for a quick hookup. Before we stepped in, the Aussie handed me something small and asked if I could hold on to it for him. I didn't even look at what it was, thinking it was maybe some kind of medicine he was carrying. It was only the next morning that I emptied my coat pocket and realized it was a baggie of cocaine. I stuck it inside an empty plastic film canister, called the Aussie, and passed it back to him outside of a Mexican restaurant across from Aperitivo. By April, when the SARS lockdowns were in full swing, Dean and I had soon managed to narrow down our list of interviewees, drawn from our respective list of contacts that included Cui Jian, Zhang Yudai, Cheng Lin, one of China's first pop stars, a Shanghai private detective operating out of the Peace Hotel, Chun Shu, who was featured on the cover of Time magazine for her banned novel, and who became the girlfriend of our German camera operator when they met at her interview one night at Susie Wong's. And of course there was Henry Lee, and there were many others, but I found myself wondering what it was all about. Cal had called me late one night, wondering the same thing, slightly sauced, and fresh from a breakup with one of many girlfriends. It was a downside of being even the most minimally attractive foreigner at the time, and Cal asked me the exact same thing. I had asked myself the same thing back in that room at the Chelsea. What the hell is it exactly that I am doing? Today had me in an office, working as the editor of the Starbucks magazine, distributed at some 35 stores in Beijing and Tianjin. It was an easy operation with all the advertising banging down our door, mostly from high-end residential property management, looking to grab a slice of that white-collar office demographic who could afford to enjoy the expensive espressos and macchiatos. I would shoot and write the features for the magazine, ranging from an Ivy League-branded golf course in black and white to a profile on the pirated DVD market, interviewing Rex Zong of Cherry Lane Theater and Henry Lee. I hadn't neglected He Jianjun and his film with Bao Luo's soundtrack. I placed my prized Hasselblad on my desk next to my Vio laptop. I turned momentarily to look outside at the spectrum of gray, then noticed a different energy in the room. It was a new sales director for the magazine, Mia from Guangzhou. Attractively delicate, barely waifish features framed by closely cropped dark red hair, her English was the second thing that struck, carrying a refreshingly strong and exotic mix of British English, spiked with a Cantonese accent. We introduced ourselves and she opened her notebook, extracting a stack of business cards from her purse, and handed me one. Done for the day, I opted to get to know her better, starting with how such a delicate piece of work like her ended up in Beijing. She opted for someplace more anonymous, so she could speak a little more freely. It was a bar, called Bar Blue. Mia was a welcome change of pace, with a much more compatible frame of thought, not so deeply dominated by a mainland upbringing. Bar Blue was its own reaction to Sanlitun, a foreign investment that pushed out a well-manicured modern design dripping with blue neon. It catered heavily to the emerging female nouveau riche in the city, not just the celebrities and embassy wives. Margaritas were pretty much the go-to, with blue Hawaiians and mojitos not far behind. There was still some dark orange sunlight when we sat down at the bar and came back to the reason why we were in Beijing, starting with her.
The unpleasant truth is, I was working as a staff reporter for a news magazine, and my editor got fired by the owners, or arrested, depending on how you want to look at it, after running a story about a construction site where the workers accidentally struck a buried arsenal of Japanese biological weapons, and that this is what caused SARS.
I stared at her while the drinks arrived. She decided to smile at me, a look of helplessness deep within her eyes. I turned back to the bar, picking up my mojito for a first sip. It was good, a little sweet, but well-rounded with the mint. I processed her words a little more and continued the conversation. You're talking about that unit in the Japanese Army, right? 8604 and 731, those biowarfare research divisions from World War II? Mia had taken her first sip and then a gulp from her margarita. She lowered her head, looked me in the eye, and picked up her drink again to sip some more from the straw. I nodded, finally getting it, drawing back on research I'd done developing those film ideas back in New York. All right, okay, fine. But why would they arrest him, though? I thought the Chinese love anti-Japanese propaganda. I mean, who cares if it's true or not, right? Mia remained silent, allowing my logic or alcohol to fill in the gaps. Major, unplanned international conflict, it doesn't start with the CCP. They're the ones who end it, right? I asked. Mia stayed silent, watching, engrossed. No? Okay, so how about the US convinces China to keep it under wraps because it draws too much unwanted attention to the fact that we recruited a bunch of these people, just like we did the Germans, in Project Paperclip. There wasn't much room to go from there, as the white space we'd started with was all scribbled over so fast by the idea we also needed to now bury. Mia sighed as I left 200 Kwai in the bar and walked out into the even more desolate streets, heading to Goose and Duck, solely determined to walk it all off. See you on Monday, I said, and left it at that. I hated that out of nowhere, a random piece of information that I worked into a screenplay that never saw actualization suddenly reminded me of the struggles back in New York, which I'd come so far to escape from. I needed a break from Selmington and drifted into Cary Center, a bar called Centro, an upper-crusty lounge with live jazz that had attracted acclaim for its Long Island iced teas, the perfect buffer. I walked into the Cary Center lobby, just behind a suited Chinese man I would have otherwise made as an American from his accent, as he offered me to go ahead of him. I didn't notice as he continued past the lobby, through the undulating halls that finally led to the elevator, and DEA's official offices in room 2008. I'd only read much later about the case they had just successfully wrapped, a Chinese-assisted May 16, 2003 roundup of a slew of heroin trafficking kingpins across 6 countries, all taken down within 24 hours. The walk was just long enough for the alcohol to fade, to give the amount of bass needed to reassess just what the hell it was I was doing in Beijing. I stopped at the Third Ring Road, waiting for the light to change, all the less affected as I took a deep breath in the early evening air. After another 10 minutes, I rounded the corner off the main avenue and headed up the street to Chaoyang Park West Gate. To the right, the muffled but growing sound of some Crystal Method remix of a Doors song reminded me that Susie Wong's would probably yield a better end to the night. I was about to stumble through the front door past a black SUV, even as a woman's voice beckoned from the steering wheel, not even caring about her Chinese accent.
Hey.
I was suddenly reliving the scene in The Bounty when Mel Gibson gets seduced by the Tahitian girls, a perfect fall from Ulysses facing the sirens. Each of the 3 SUV girls had their own special flavor of appeal and knew how to use it like some guys use a credit card.
Where are you going? Do you need a ride?
I propped myself against their door. Well, where are you heading?
Maybe you can come with us.
I got pretty careless in the face of SARS, so why the hell not spin the bottle with these 3 lovelies? I climbed into the back seat, only realizing the next morning that, in spite of all the fun, I was the one being taken advantage of. In the short era while it lasted, Beijing was going through its own sexual revolution, and then there was always Maggie's. The pool table tonight was full of advertisements, from short skirts to open-cut shirts with the goods all but spilling out in front of the cue ball. The chums I'd arrived with had since dissipated in silent agreement to just follow their eyes and nothing else. I had no longer picked up a game against a slender, dark-eyed, sexy black chiffon shadow named Surreal. That a fight had broken out between a couple of other girls, a lot more rough around the edges, tufts of their hair floating to the floor beyond the flying fists. But Surreal, with the countenance of Pam Grier's deadly magical siren from Something Wicked This Way Comes, passed on the chaos without breaking a sweat. White Rabbit was much more than a basement near the new American embassy, thick with smoke from the fog machines that no one thought might create issues without adequate ventilation. But whether the owners figured it out or not, their patrons were too infused with foreign-controlled substances to care. The music lost its muffle and gained its loud, beat-driven clarity as Surreal pulled me forward to dance with some 20 other people on the hard cement floor. The fog switched rapidly, lit up back and forth between blue and brilliant white, as the perfectly timed beat injected new energy into everyone who was there, once again providing a release for the stress that seemed to build up on a regular basis, just from being in a city on the other side of the world. Those reflective moments of self-consciousness were popping up with increasing regularity at every club or bar or party. I began to feel like someone who might have to be getting home soon. On the Shanghai leg of the China Nights project with Dean, we checked into the first hotel that our financiers had set us up with. They were not the best fixers, though. Early in the morning, as we lay sleeping in our respective twin beds, we were awakened by a sudden series of thuds above us, followed by the crash of something through a large window, and then another crash and wailing of an injured woman coming from the alley below. Jacob, our German camera operator, got up and walked to the window in his underwear to investigate. "Oh, Gott," he said, looking down, rubbing his eyes and shaking his head as he walked back to his bed. Our upstairs neighbors had thrown a hooker out the window. A nice touch to the black mold-infested patch on the wall, which we avoided coming anywhere near before requesting a transfer. The rest of the trip was by comparison, on the opposite end, much better, and we knocked out about 7 interviews, some of them through incidental encounters. One was a calligrapher who could philosophically interpret over 1,000 traditional bone carvings, who we found sitting in a wheelchair, using a water brush in the parking lot. Antoine, a one-handed, suave French virtuoso on the editing board, returned with us to Beijing, where he'd partnered with his fiancée Karen, a Chinese-American PR professional. They had their own outfit with clients like Grey Goose Vodka and Benetton, and had landed their biggest client yet, the Special Olympics. Its primary spokesperson, who was going to visit Beijing, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd been tapped to wrangle the video shooting solo and followed the governor from reception to a street walk where someone was apprehended, apparently trying to steal Arnold's likeness to boost credibility for their own, completely unrelated movie. The footage from the reception was exactly what they wanted, though, and Antoine kept me on. China Nights had us filming a lot of things that the government did not want to be seen, especially before the Olympics, in a period marked by brutally insensitive image management that closed several nightlife spots favored by expats in favor of what the CCP were calling beautification. These are the same people who decided a young girl wasn't pretty enough to stand in front of an Olympic ceremony, so they had a different kid to do the lip sync while the real singer belted out the words from backstage. One of those things the CCP did not want seen was a police-owned brothel at the Kunlun Hotel just near the Capitol Mansion. And just as I was beginning to question everything, Antoine offered me another paid gig to shoot a strawberry farm just outside of Shenyang.